نبدأ. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. So today inshallah ta'ala we'll be continuing discussing the book Al-Arba'in an-Nawawiyya, and last week we had ended Hadith the 34th Hadith in this series, and today bi'awnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala we'll be starting Hadith Al-Khamis wa Thalathun. So this will be the 35th Hadith in this series. So we'll be starting this Hadith today inshallah ta'ala, and as we'll normally do, we'll read the Hadith, then we'll go through the different aspect of explaining this Hadith bi'awnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tafaddal.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Hadith number 35, the Brotherhood of Islam. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم لا تحاسدوا لا تناجشوا ولا تباغضوا ولا تدابروا ولا يبيع بعضكم على بيع بعض وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا المسلم أخو المسلم لا يظلمه ولا يخذله ولا يكذبه ولا يحقره التقوى ها هنا، ويشير إلى صدر 3 مرات بحسب إمر من الشر أن يحقر أخاه المسلم. كل المسلم على المسلم حرام دمه وماله وعرضه. رواه Muslim. On the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, that he said, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, do not have envy of one another, do not inflate prices on one another, do not hate one another, do not turn your backs on one another, do not undersell one another, but rather be worshippers of Allah and brothers. The Muslim is the brother of his fellow Muslim. He does not oppress him, nor does he abandon him, nor does he lie to him, nor does he belittle him. Taqwa is here, and he pointed to his chest 3 times. It is a sufficient act of evil that a person belittles his Muslim brother. Every Muslim to another Muslim is sacred, haram. His blood, his wealth, and his honor, related by Muslim.
So this is the Hadith that inshallah ta'ala will be covering in this series of An-Nawawiyya, Arba'in an-Nawawiyya. So this being the 35th Hadith in this series. So he opened the Hadith concerning the Hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, and previously I mentioned matters pertaining to this particular Sahabi. So at previous sessions or lessons that we had covered something of the life of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, so there's no need for repetition. Then he mentioned this Hadith that they mentioned here that regarding the Prophet of Islam, that he states certain things that the Muslim that they should try to avoid. When I mentioned لا تحاسدوا until the end of the Hadith. So as for this particular Hadith that he mentioned at the end of the Hadith, Rawahu Muslim, that the Hadith is narrated by Imam Muslim rahimahullah ta'ala in his Al-Jami' Sahih. So as the first khutwa, the normal procedure that we follow, that we'll do a takhrij of the Hadith. So we're going to somewhat check the Hadith. So in your book that it mentioned that it mentioned al-Muslim, from the part they mentioned a Muslim أخو المسلم لا يظلم ولا يخذل ولا يكذب. يكذب
ولا يكذب.
نعم موجودة.
نعم
okay.
موجود.
طيب. So you find that concerned that this hadith, as we'll discuss, that even with Imam Muslim, when he mentions hadith, he mentions hadith with various wordings. So the hadith is mentioned with various wordings. Some hadith may be mukhtasar, that they are brief in some of the words that are mentioned, and some may be more detailed. So if we go back to, as you mentioned your hadith in the Muslim, so normally we'll start with what is mentioned by Busiri, where he mentioned concerning this particular hadith, that he mentions that when he mentioned his hadith, he mentioned قال بوصيري, that when he mentioned رواه مسلم قال بوصيري ومالك في الموطأ, that the hadith also is in Muwatta of Imam Malik, والبخاري وأبو داود انتهى. So according to Busiri, that is hadith also is collected by Imam Malik in his book Al-Muwatta, Imam Bukhari, and Abu Dawud. Then they mentioned so also the hadith as well. So that's concerning what is mentioned by Busiri regarding this particular hadith, that when he mentioned in this checking of the hadith, it mentioned, as we stated, al-Muslim أخو المسلم لا يظلم ولا يخذل ولا يحقر without لا يكذب. So there's that word that is missing. So some of the prints of this hadith that you might find a slight difference regarding some of the wordings that may be present here, that in some may not be present. The word لا يكذب. Then if we go back to Imam Muslim, to his narration, as they mentioned, that this hadith is not, as we'll see, that Imam Muslim, when he mentioned this hadith with various wordings. So he mentioned the hadith also, what's called shawahid, that is hadith also narrated on other sahabi, other than Abu Hurairah, but we'll kind of somewhat first mention the narration of Abu Hurairah and the different wording that it actually mentions. So Imam Muslim, that they mentioned that the hadith here is mentioned on the title Bab Tahrim Al-Dhum wa Tajassus wa Tanafus wa Tanajush wa Nahwiha. Then they mentioned, as for the hadith, they mentioned the hadith of Abu Hurairah anhu, he mentioned قال. So this narration of Abu Hurairah, it states أن رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام قال إياكم والظن. So some narration, it starts with إياكم والظن فإن الظن أكذب حديث ولا تحسسوا. So in this narration that is mentioned here, that is inside Muslim, that is wording, it mentioned إياكم والظن فإن الظن أكذب حديث ولا تحسسوا ولا تجسسوا ولا تنافسوا ولا تحاسدوا ولا تباغضوا ولا تدابروا وكونوا Ibadullah ikhwana. So that's one of the wordings. So that wording is somewhat, it has from what we read, that is mentioned here, some additional. So it starts out by Iyakum wadhan. Then also of additional things it mentioned, Wala tahassasu. That's not mentioned in the narration here. So also they mentioned that in another narration of Imam Muslim, that is mentioned here on Abu Hurairah anhu, where it mentioned that قال, the hadith wording, La tahajaru. ولا تدابروا ولا تحسسوا ولا يبع بعضكم على بيع بعض وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا. So that's another wording of the hadith. So this other wording, the second wording, which is also upon Abu Hurairah, that it mentioned لا تهاجروا لا تهاجروا, that you are not to, as I mentioned, لا تهاجروا, not to make al-hajar, boycott of each other, ولا تدابروا, not to turn your back. Even that wording is mentioned, but it mentioned, so it has additional wording which is mentioned, لا تهاجروا, and also لا تحسسوا. So they mentioned تحسسوا is where the person istima hadithun nas, where the person is somewhat listening unto the kalam of people. So that's another additional wording that is not mentioned. Then also another wording of the hadith it mentioned, also again and Abu Hurairah mentioned, لا تحاسدوا. So it starts off لا تحاسدوا ولا تباغضوا ولا تجسسوا ولا تحسسوا ولا تناجشوا وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا. So that's another different wording of the hadith. So you find that many tabi'een have narrated this hadith upon Abu Hurairah, but also you find a difference in some of the wordings. Now we might some have additional wordings and some may have less wordings. Then the another narration of the hadith that I mentioned on Amash, that he mentioned with the isnad, he mentioned لا تقاطعوا ولا تدابروا ولا تباغضوا ولا تحاسدوا وكونوا إخوانا كما أمركم الله. That's another wording of the hadith. That's another wording. All this inside Muslim. So Imam Muslim rahimahullah ta'ala, other thing that with his book, compared to that, he tried to gather all the wording of the hadith. So he's just trying to give us that regard concerning the same hadith of Abu Hurairah, that you have various narration, various people narrating upon Abu Hurairah, but slight difference in wordings, where some may have additional certain things that they all coincide with certain wordings, but also with certain wordings, there's additional and also subtractions. That so that's concerning another narration. Also another they mention an Abu Hurairah that he mentioned قال upon the Prophet عليه السلام قال لا تباغضوا ولا تدابروا ولا تنافسوا لا تنافسوا وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا. So the one before it mentioned ولا تحاسدوا وكونوا إخوانا. Then it mentioned كما أمركم الله, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have commanded you. So it mentioned كونوا إخوانا, be brothers. كما أمركم الله, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have enjoined or instructed or commanded you. But the wording that is mentioned regarding that, the one that they mentioned here of Imam Muslim, that the wording is as follows. This is the one they mentioned. قال عليه السلام لا تحاسدوا. So it mentioned لا تحاسدوا ولا تناجشوا ولا تباغضوا ولا تدابروا ولا يبيع بعضكم على بيع بعض وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا. المسلم أخو المسلم لا يظلم ولا يخذل ولا يحقر. So in this narration with the one that is more in line with this one, there's a word missing, that this one have an additional wording that is not mentioned inside Muslim. So the one that you have there, and we read, it mentioned ولا يكذب. That one is not inside Muslim. So that wording لا يكذب is additional from a different narration, but not from the narration of Imam Muslim. Clear?
No.
يكذب that it mentioned. So the wording of Imam Muslim, it goes as follows from Imam Muslim. His narration, it mentioned again that it mentioned لا تحاسدوا ولا تناجشوا ولا تباغضوا ولا تدابروا ولا يبيع بعضكم على بيع بعض وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا. المسلم أخو المسلم لا يظلم ولا يخذل ولا يحقر. So the word that in, if you have it in your print, we can say ولا يكذب, circle that one.
Yes, yeah, just did that.
Naam, that circle that one, or put a line that's not in the hadith of that is mentioned here from Imam Muslim. That wording is not mentioned by Imam Muslim till the end of the hadith.
To the end.
That when I said to the end, that meaning that from the hadith here, everything else in line. But so the minute they mentioned ولا يحقر التقوى ها هنا ويشير إلى صدره 3 مرات بحسب امرئ من الشر أن يحقر أخاه مسلم كل مسلم على مسلم حرام دم ومال وإرض. That's the hadith. So if we were to compare between the hadith that is mentioned here by Nawawi and the one that is mentioned inside Muslim, we see a slight difference. Slight difference of what? That was one word, huh?
One word.
Just one word. And the reason for this, that they mentioned, the ulama have mentioned of the ulama of hadith, that Nawawi and like some of the ulama of that era, coming down at times, and now can somebody know that it is repeated in a few of his books. For example, Riyadus Salihin, where you find that sometimes he's mentioned the hadith not directly from the source. So he may mention an hadith, and he said hadith from Sahih Muslim, but he's not like dictating the hadith from Sahih Muslim, the original book, or from Bukhari. He's using like a secondary source. So he's not recording the hadith directly from, and you find that not only him, but others who fall into this. We find at a certain time, we said, not like today, we find that access to books are easy, and widespread. In those times, a bit different, because everything was maktut. I said, manuscript. You understand? So access to the book wasn't as readily available. So you find that like Nawawi in many of his books and some of his works, that when he's mentioned hadith, is not directly from the primary source. It's from a secondary source. With me? So for example, of recent, the book Riyadus Salihin. Riyadus Salihin, that also the same thing. That An-Nawawi rahimahullah, when he's narrating hadith from that book, is not coming from the primary source, the original source of Bukhari, Muslim, and the likes. He's taking it from a secondary source. So at times you'll find difference in what you might find in the original book, the source itself, Abu Dawood, or like I said in this one, compared to what is in the book, where a few little slight differences. Naam. So one of the Mashaykh who have done a tahqiq of An-Nawawi, Riyadh al-Salihin, where he verify what is mentioned by An-Nawawi and go back to the primary source and see that at times things are a bit different.
Is there an error on the part of Nawawi?
Now, in that way, say error in a sense that by way of, because he's not taking the hadith from, for example, I have this book, Sahih Muslim, in front of me, so I can make that comparison. But he may not have this book, the original Imam Sahih Muslim or Sahih Bukhari. So he's getting it from another source, a secondary source. You with me?
Yeah.
So that's.
Do we know which source it is?
That's the thing.
Because like I think in one of the hadith, like one of the first ones, you said that one of the hadith was not in Bukhari, but it was from Al-Humaydi.
Hey.
Is that similar?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. So I said, you might find that in the books of An-Nawawi, you might find those cases. Just as example, I find not just him said and others. That sometimes, but I said the benefit of this that, for example, the book which is famous book, which is Bulugh al-Maram. Bulugh al-Maram. That at times, that I said that the Bulugh al-Maram is a mukhtasar of another book. But sometimes a person, for example, I find this book, a book in hadith, for example, and I want to make a mukhtasar of it. I want to kind of somewhat to do some work around this book, which is to condense it, to shorten it. Right? So I'm coming from this book, but also this book. So if he has errors, I will fall into his errors. Because I'm not going back to the hadith. The verse might mention the hadith. But rather than me taking the hadith directly from a primary source, the original source, I'm taking it from a secondary source, which is the book that I'm working with, which is not a primary source. So whatever error in those works, I will just fall into the error. So if you add a few words here or there, or miss a few words here and there, then I also fall into the same thing. So you find that in the book of Bulugh al-Maram, that if you were to compare some of the hadith, not all, some of the hadith with the original hadith in Bukhari and Muslim and other sources, you'll find a slight difference.
So you can't say that you're quoting Bukhari and Muslim if you're taking a word, so they technically...
No, I'm saying, you can mention Bukhari because the original hadith is in Bukhari. You understand? Just the wording is not that as precise. The wording, but the original hadith, said the hadith is actually in Bukhari, but you might find a little difference, slight difference in wordings.
Sometimes you copy and paste to send to someone. Does that mean it's not the same?
Aims at the person copy and paste and said, and he mentioned a source, and that's not a problem. It's the same thing. But if you make an error in what you copy and paste, copy and paste, that said you might take a hadith that you copy from some other person that they made an error, they add a word or they missed a word, but because you see and it said Bukhari. And the hadith actually is in Bukhari, but a word have been missing. So you just copy and paste and send it off. And you say, Bukhari, you're not totally wrong, but you weren't precise. So the ulama of hadith, they like to be precise where that they like to cross-reference things back. If you say the hadith inside Bukhari, okay, that a person working on this book, did you go back to Sahih Bukhari to check is the wording actually as mentioned in this secondary source? You understand? So you find like in the books of fiqh, that sometimes the books of the fuqaha, that they are not quoting hadith from a primary source. Or something that the author is doing from his memory. So you might find errors here and there. You find errors that you understand. Sometimes you say, okay, that is because the error sometimes could have the consequence can also go on the hukum that is drawing, because that wording is not in the original hadith. So the thing is that always, as I said, in these works, especially the person wants to memorize the hadith. Now, I want to memorize the hadith as it is in Sahih Bukhari. You understand that? We said, try to find a print that is very precise. Because some prints is not as precise in cross-referencing the hadith to its primary source. They just mention whatever is there and they accept it. Because An-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the ulama, but it's to know the manhaj of the ulama regarding at times when they're quoting hadith. Clear? So there's no hadith that he mentioned, that a slight difference in the word. So you find that it is mentioned here, like in Ibn Rajab, in his explanation, it is mentioned. But a hadith is not a part of the original hadith inside Muslim. Nam?
In none of them, because you did read like 15.
Hey, so I'm saying, hey, so all I want is that wording is not there.
None of
لا
them.
يكذب.
Hey,
لا يكذب.
hey, for the one that we mentioned from Sahih Muslim, so that wording, la yakzib, is not in all the one that we are mentioning from Sahih Muslim. Rubma that I made an error, but from the one that we read, there was no mentioned. So also he mentioned the hadith inside Muslim, but he mentioned also the hadith also is narrated by, said no other of the Sahaba, that he mentioned on Anas bin Malik. So there's another narration of the hadith by another Sahabi, who is Anas bin Malik. They call it Shawahid or Mata or Shawahid. So all those narrations that we mentioned of an Abu Hurairah from different tabi'un that have narrated upon him, they're today that we refer to as Mutabaat. So you find that a series, many that they mention, many of the tabi'in have narrated this hadith upon Abu Hurairah, but also on those narration you might find that some may zid wa yankus. Some may have additional wording, and some may have less wording. Nam? So that's the thing, but they mentioned here that this hadith is mentioned by many amongst the who have narrated on Abu Hurairah. Amongst them, they mention over 15 who have narrated different tabi'in who have narrated this hadith and Abu Hurairah. But slight difference in those wordings, That even I mentioned hadith inside Muslim, that they mentioned that another narration of hadith, that Abu Hurairah mentioned that فقال وذكر نحو حديث داود وزاد ونقص. That some narration have a little additional wording, and some also have less wording. مما زاد فيه, and also of the additional wording in some of the narration mentioned, إن الله لا ينظر إلى أجسامكم ولا إلى صوركم ولكن ينظر إلى قلوبكم. And so you have that narration, and also mention إلى قلوبكم وأعمالكم. So different wordings of the hadith, different wordings of the hadith. But we're going to somewhat concentrate on the one that is mentioned here. And also you find that other Sahaba have narrated this hadith. So you have other Sahaba who have narrated this hadith. As we mentioned, Anas bin Malik have narrated this hadith. So the narration that as yakzibu, they have mentioned that narration is in At-Tirmidhi. That of the word wala yakzibu is in At-Tirmidhi. So you have some verses, Al-Muslim, the nation with At-Tirmidhi mentioned, and Abu Hurairah, Al-Muslim, Akhu Muslim, La yakhunu, wa la yakdhibu, wa la yakhdhulu. That's narration in the At-Tirmidhi. Then when he mentioned that, he mentioned, قال الترمذي حسن غريب وإلى باب عن علي وأيوب وأبي أيوب. So also you have narration of this hadith that he mentioned, and Ali, that is similar or close to hadith, and also Ayub. But this narration that he mentioned, and that he mentioned Hasanun Gharib, that this wording of At-Tirmidhi needs to be investigated further. So it's being authentic regarding what he mentioned, La yakhunu wa la yakdhibu. So others of the Sahaba who have narrated this hadith, you have narration of Abdullah ibn Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhuma, have a narration of this hadith that's in Bukhari and Muslim. Also that of those who have narrated this hadith, they mention Uqba ibn Amir. So Uqba ibn Amir also narrated hadith of this meaning, where it mentioned al-mu'min. So they use the word, doesn't use the word al-Muslim, use the word al-mu'min, akhu al-mu'min. So some narration mention al-mu'min, akhu al-mu'min. La yuhil lil-mu'min, it is not permissible for a mu'min and yabta ala bi'abi, for him to purchase something, try to purchase his brother. Then I mentioned wala yakhtub ala khitbat akhi, and also for him not to propose upon the proposal of his brother. حتى يذروا, unless you have abandoned this proposal. Then also another, we mentioned Anas bin Malik, the third amongst the Sahaba who have narrated his hadith. So we have Ibn Omar, Uqba ibn Amir, the third amongst the Sahaba who have narrated his hadith, Anas bin Malik. Also fourth, then the hadith of Anas bin Malik, it mentioned لا تباغضوا ولا تحاسدوا ولا تدابروا وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا ولا يحل للمسلم أن يهجر أخاه فوق 3 أيام. That's the narration of Anas bin Malik. Anas ibn Malik, and that narration in Bukhari and Muslim. So they mentioned also Jabir. So the one with Jabir, they mention Al-Muslim, أخو المسلم لا يخون ولا يخذل المسلم يد على من سواهم Al-Hadith. Then also, so those are the hadith that I've mentioned regarding also you have like I mentioned more so those of the more those narrations that I've mentioned regarding this particular hadith and others.
Is Al-A'mash one of them as well? Al-A'mash. Al-A'mash.
Amash, one of the Tabi, Amash from the Tabi'un narrated. So you have many Tabi'in that have narrated on Abu Hurairah, both said with different wordings. As for the mawdu' of this particular hadith, as for the mawdu' of this hadith, as mentioned regarding that umur that I mentioned, that ma yunafi al-akhuwa, things that negates brotherhood. So things that can negate or have a negative effect on brotherhood. So the hadith is somewhat that there's hukuk between Muslim, and that of these hukuk, that things that a person should try avoid in doing these things towards his brother. So this hadith is mentioned, as I mentioned, not to do of these things, the Muslim, not to do of these acts towards his brother. And this brother concerns between a Muslim and a Muslim. So this is regarding a Muslim towards another Muslim. As for the ahamiyat, this hadith, as for the importance of this hadith, that they have mentioned, this hadith somewhat it covers regarding hukuk al-wajiba lil muslimin or bain al-muslimin. That the hadith is somewhat, that this hadith highlights that of those things that are said of those hukuk, those rights that are wajib between the Muslims. Also they mentioned that asl, this hadith considered to be an asl, one of the foundation or fundamental hadith fi tanzim alaqat bayna al-muslimin. That also regarding that this hadith can somewhat set the stage regarding of those alaqa, that relationship between the Muslims that they should have with each other, regarding these different regarding matters regarding not spying on each other, not having hatred towards each other, not trying to outbuy each other, not to not to seek an engagement upon his brother. So all these matters regarding that the Muslim should be mindful of. And also from the hadith also shows regarding that the Muslim that is not concerned ta'ati bil ulfa, that the Muslim can somewhat try to have a good relationship between themselves. So the foster good relation between themselves and brotherhood between themselves, and also nabz asbab al-furqa bain al-muslimin, and also things that one should avoid in having a split between the Muslims. and separation and division. So things to avoid, so as not to bring about division and separation between the Muslims and between the Brotherhood of the Muslims. Also the hadith, by way of show the importance regarding also fi daf al-madar, and the Muslimin, that the hadith show that that is the hadith that removing anything which is harmful between the Muslim. So avoiding that which would be harmful between the Muslim, and also that to encourage things that will build a jalb al-masalih, that will bring about good between the Muslim, bring about benefit between the Muslims. So trying to eradicate those things that will bring about evil between the Muslim, bad relation between the Muslim, and also try to bring about things that will be of benefit for the Muslim. And also that he mentioned at the end, he made the mention that the asl regarding hurmat, that the life of the Muslim is to be respected and to be honored, the life of the Muslim, by not spilling off his blood. Also the Muslim's property, his belongings, and also that of the Muslim honor. So these three things that the Muslim should honor, these things, which is the Muslim life, his property, and his honor. And that these things are haram for a person to transgress the bounds regarding these matters. So that shows the importance, they mention ahamiyat of this hadith. So the general benefit of the hadith, this hadith somewhat is to cover the points regarding that النهي أن كل ما من شأنه أن يجلب الفساد بين المسلمين. That this hadith is going to somewhat to show regarding that Islam had forbid or put in place or caution and forbid anything that would bring about bad relation between the Muslim. So anything that would bring about bad relation between the Muslim, that Islam have put draw a line on those things and forbid those things between the Muslims. And by this, the opposite of the Muslim concern, that also encouraging the Muslim that he should mahasin akhlaq, that a Muslim that he should try to be of those of that show excellent akhlaq and display good manners between themselves. So not to deceive your brother and the likes, turn your back on your brother, not to to try to outbid your brother. So all those things showing that you should have muhasin akhlaq. And also it shows a fundamental rule in Islam that it is forbidden regarding a Muslim taking of his brother's wealth except with his permission. So it is forbidden for a Muslim to take of another Muslim's or people's wealth without their permission and consent. Also for a Muslim to attack another Muslim honor or his name. And his property. So, and then also it shows and also a Muslim to honor Muslim life and not to spill the blood of another Muslim. And also the hadith showed regarding that the importance regarding at-taqwa, the importance of taqwa, and that at-taqwa, it goes back, it starts with the heart. So at-taqwa, that the place of taqwa is in the heart. So those are the main points of the hadith in general. So the main points of the hadith in general. Then after those points that they discuss regarding the hadith, they start to discuss the hadith now with some more detail on of the points that they mentioned. So the hadith, it mentioned regarding of those points that it mentioned of those things that Muslims should avoid. So it mentioned that if we were to look at all the hadith that they mentioned, but as for the one here that it mentioned, la tahasad, so forbidding al-hasad between a Muslim. Second, tanajash, this type of trying to outbid your brother. وَلَا تَبَاغَضُوا, and also not to have hatred towards your brother. وَلَا تَدَابَرُوا, not to turn your back on your brother. That's how many?
3.
Hasad, تناجش, تباغض, تدابر.
4.
That's 4. وَلَا يُبِيَ بَعْضُكُمْ عَلَى بِيع بَعْد. That's 5. Not to try to outbid your brother. Then it mentioned المسلم أخو المسلم لا يظلم. That's another. وَلَا يَخْذُلُ. How many is that?
7.
And they mention here وَلَا يَكْذِبُ. As mentioned here, وَلَا يَكْذِبُ in brackets. وَلَا يَحْقِرُ. How many is that in total?
8.
Aywa. Then so that's 8 things that it mentioned. Then it mentioned after them. Then it mentioned again كل مسلم على مسلم حرام. Damu. So of those things which become haram upon a Muslim, you should not cross those boundaries for another Muslim. Damu, malu, وإرضه. How many is that in total?
11.
8 and 11.
Yeah.
Hey, so 11 points in the hadith mentioned that the Muslim should pay attention to these things. So 11 points that the Muslim should pay attention regarding how he deal with another Muslim on these specific matters. So of those I've explained, or most of those I've explained, they'll go through each of these points point by point. You'll go through each of these points point by point. So we start to the or should we stop here or start the first? Start the first. So they mention al-hasad. So they mention the first وَلَا تَحَاسَدُوا. So they mention لا تحاسدوا, that the khitab is to the ummah. Khitab to the ummah. That for all the Muslim, those who are Muslims, male and female alike, that of these things that they should try to not to fall into these things. So they mention the first وَلَا تَحَاسَدُوا. So they mention al-hasad being the first. They mention hasad being the first of those things according to this particular narration. So al-hasad, that as for with the definition that I have mentioned concerning hasad, al-hasad tamanna or tamanni al-zawal ni'mat ghayr. That for the person to wish that whatever ni'mah, bounty the person have, it is taken away from them. So the person who wishing or desiring, have that desire, that person who hopes, wish that whatever a person has of good, that it be taken away from them. Ay tamanni zawal ni'mah al-ghayr. So other people may possess something, so the person wants, you have that thing, I don't want you to have that. Not that in this case they want it to come to him or to anyone, just what he doesn't, in this case, he doesn't want you to remain on that good. And it to be removed. So that's one of the definitions that's given concerning hasad. So tamanni zawal ni'mah al-ghayr. Our dimension of the definition, أو karaha, to dislike, ما أنعم الله به على غير, that what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have honored others with, have blessed others with, of His ni'mah, that وإن لم يتمنى الزوال, even if you don't per se want this to be removed, but a person dislike Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showing or granting other things of His bounties. You just don't want people to receive things of good. So either the person does want all that person to be in a lower state or not having anything at all. That person not having anything. So that's of the definition this given regarding al-hasad. Then they mention here regarding, so that's of those definition. We might add some more, but they mention concerning An-Nas, Aqsam An-Nas, regarding Al-Hasad. Aqsam An-Nas, when in relation to Al-Hasad, having envy towards others, where people may have things and you don't want a person to remain or to have that thing. So it is mentioned here regarding of Aqsam An-Nas in relation to Al-Hasad, minhum, of those people who man yas'a fi zawal ni'mat al-mahsud bil-baghi alayh bil-qawl wa fi'l. So they mentioned of those people that they want that person who, the person that they have that hasad towards, that thing to be removed from them, by way of and being unjust to them in an unjust, by way of either things that are said or done to them, but is for that thing to be removed from them. So wanted a person want that thing, would put effort in that person that they have hasad towards, that whatever that they possess, for it to be removed. Either they try to do so wrongfully by way of speech or by their action. So any way that they can remove or bring about that person to lose what they have, whether by way of things that they will say against the person or things that they will do towards that person, they don't care. Their objective is that person not to remain upon that thing. So that's concerning of those who are like this. Then also they mention that of those people, of that category, that person, of those ones also who want that thing to be removed from that person in whatever way possible, but also for him now to receive this. So to be taken from that person and now be given to him. So you have those people who are of that type. So the person want that thing to be removed from that person in any way possible, by way of speech or by way of actions that are done against them. Of those people who have that type of approach, but also they want that thing to come to them. They want now to receive what the person had or have. Then you have a next person who he doesn't really want that thing for themselves. So the first person wants it for themselves, and the other person doesn't want it for themselves. For them, they're just kind of somewhat, it's sufficient for them that you don't have it. Not necessarily that they want what you have. They just don't want you to have that thing. So people of those categories, people of those types. Well, hasad, they mention also hasad ala maratib. So you have hasad, that it goes on different degrees, on different levels. So you have hasad on different levels. So the hasad on different levels, that a person who have hasad and what they desire, what they wish is for them to kind of somewhat to outdo others. So you have hasad where you want to outdo others. Marahil or maratib. So أن يتمنى أن يفوق غيره. So the person wishes to kind of somewhat to outdo others. So that at times is jaiz. So a person kind of somewhat want to outdo others, but they still remain upon good. So the person that you want to outdo the person, but still you want the person to keep what they have, remain upon good, but you just want to do better than them. They said that is jaiz. That is jaiz. And they said in reality that is not per se al-hasad. That in reality is not hasad. Because you want a person to remain upon good what they are upon, to keep what they have, but you just want to be above them. So you might find a person, so that way, for instance, that a person that tanafas fil khair, that a person want to compete with others in things of good. You upon good, but I still want to to do more good than you are. So there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with this. And you find that the Sahaba and the Tabi'in, and he says Ahl Salah, people of good, they must find they'll compete with each other in trying to establish good. But also they want good for everyone else. But they would want to be of those ones who they exceed others. Then the second, maratib, an yakra ni'matullah ta'ala ala ghayr, with a person that he dislike, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessing that person, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessing others with his favors. So the person dislike Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessing others with his favors. ولكن لا يسعى في تنزيل But he doesn't want that person, that thing to be removed from that person. He dislike it, but he's not going to take effort in trying to rid that person of what they have. He's not going to be involved in this. In that case, that person, yadafi and the hasad that he has, that person for disliking what other people have of good, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless people with, but he's not per se that he's putting effort in trying to undo what people have. Then in that case, the person has somewhat he needs to overcome that hasad, that jealousy that he may have for others, and that dislike that he has towards others. So in that case, others maybe seem to be better than he is. Then it's for him to put effort in trying to do more. Try to do more. And not to dislike what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have granted others of his favor. Then the next level, أن يقع في قلبه الحسد, the person have envy in his heart. So envy is within him. ويسعى في تنزيل رتبة الذي حسده, and also he wants then to bring that person down. That person, he then also wants to bring that person that he have this hasad towards. That hasad is haram. That hasad becomes haram. Now the person who put no effort, he have no hasad in his heart towards that person, jealousy and envy towards that person, but also that he want that thing to be stripped and be removed from that person. Then that is haram. That is haram. So those are the different levels that they mention regarding al-hasad. That a person that others have good, you want the person to remain upon good, but also you want to outdo that person. But for them to still remain upon good. The next person have a dislike towards the person what they have and possess, but he doesn't want that person to lose what they have. But that dislike that he has towards that person of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them, then he needs to overcome this jealousy that he possess or have towards that person. And maybe that's the way for him to accept that others have outdone him. Others are maybe in a better situation than he is.
But that's not haram though.
And in that case, concerned to know that in that case there's hasad, so not taught that he needs to overcome. He needs to work on himself to a degree. He needs to work on himself to a degree. Then they mention regarding the more serious one, the person who have this hasad in his heart towards others, towards a particular person, but also he's going to take steps to bring that person down because of the hasad that he has towards him. And that jealousy. So that becomes haram. That becomes haram. And that will be against that person. That will be, against that person.
It's just a khata basically.
No, so that's a haram. Eh? اي نقص في نفسي ايوه. They mention regarding that, so we discussed that, they mention the afat al-hasad, or mafasidu, that thing that considered to be of the afat, that the evil, or the evil consequence that comes with hasad. The evil that comes with hasad. So there's mafasid, that comes with a person of hasad towards others. Of those that I mentioned, of the mafasid al-hasad, the person of envy, that hasad, they mention al-hasid, yasi, al-adab ma'allah. Of the things of the evil of hasad, that person, that they have bad adab with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا يَرْضَى بِقَضَاهِ. And also should a person to know that he is not contented or not pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree. That's part of the decree for such person to have such and such thing, and maybe you not having. So having that hasad towards that person, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed them with, they show that's not a shortcomings, a naqs. They said no, it's like a naqs in a person's tawheed. That shows a deficiency in the person's tawheed. Where the person having, they mention su'al adab ma'allah. So the person having bad thoughts with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also not being fully pleased with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have decreed. So this shows regarding that a naqs in the ear concerning of iman bil qada wal qadar. Also, of the things regarding that with al-hasad, that becomes it shows regarding it, yufsid at-ta'at, that hasad, that it kind of somewhat, it spoils the person's acts of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It spoils or corrupts the person's obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With a person of hasad, then you start to look for negative things in others. So it starts with a person always to see the negative in others, even the positive, he sees them as negative. So always see the negative in others, or try to find the negative in others because of that hasad. Hey, so that it yufsid a thought, that it corrupts a person, we call it obedience, and also it causes the person to yab'atan khatayat. It push the person to look for shortcomings in others. Or we're going to find the shortcomings in other people, so as to attack them. So a person might have, he's a person that person says, no, things going well for them. Things going well for them. But because of that hasad, that envy that towards the person, he try to find, try to pinpoint the person's shortcomings. Look at the person this, look at the person that, the person go weak points, then he makes he bring up those things and magnify them. Also, they mention regarding the mafasid of al-hasad, أنه أول ذنب أوصي الله تعالى به. That's of the first of the sin that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that in disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first sin in disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So regarding concerning Iblis alayhi ma yastahaq min Allah, regarding that that he go against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command because of al-hasad towards Adam alayhi salam. So he was commanded to do al-sujud. So the person, so because of that hasad, he was unable to comply with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, which was an asjud lil Adam alayhi salam. So he was unable to make prostration to Adam as commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he started to make comparison between himself and Adam alayhi salam. So he said, no, that if Adam was made from this and I am made from that, so then started pull faults, find faults in things that are outside your ability, things that are beyond you. Also hasad, regarding concerning that between with the first of sin committed with Iblis, with Adam alayhi salam, then also of the sin that occurred on earth regarding concerning Abna al-Adam. So regarding the children of Adam, that also hasad came into play. Hasad came into play regarding the children of Adam, that hasad came into play, where that the marriage, one was jealous of another regarding the marriage situation, then he start to plot to destroy his brother, to kill his brother. Aywa. Then also they mentioned regarding concerns also of hasad, that the evil of hasad regarding that people falling into sin, that also with Yusuf alayhi salam, wa ikhwatu, and his brothers, that they kind of somewhat, they think that their father favored Yusuf over them, so they start to plot against Yusuf alayhi salam. So hasad can lead to people doing do things that are sinful, which is harming others, doing harm to others. So hasad become of those things that brought about people falling into sin. They mention that the hikmah, they mentioned hasud la yasud abadan, that hasud la yasud abadan, that the person who have hasad, he cannot really should not lead others. The one who have hasad should not be the one in charge of others. He's never a person who is fit to be a leader. He's never fit to be the leader. Just as bakhil ya'kul amwal, that also the person who's bakhil, also you have to just be cautious of the person who's stingy. So the person who's bakhil, that everyone somewhat will benefit from his wealth except for him. But overall, I mentioned concerning hasud la yasud abadan, that a person who have hasad is not a person who's qualified to lead others and should not lead others. So those are the mafasid of asad. Those are the general mafasid of asad. So that inshallah ta'ala will end. And with asad, we just mentioned end with ilaj. They mentioned other things, but we just end with concerning that the ilaj of asad. To end, and we just end with asad. That is of the ilaj, of the cure of hasad, the remedy to overcome hasad. That one, أن يعلم أن كل نعمة بتقدير الله سبحانه وتعالى. That for a person to admit and to know that whatever that any ni'mah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless others with or grant to people, know that it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree. Whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant others, then know that from the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And not for the person to challenge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding how He has decreed things. Not to challenge or try to go against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have decreed. So that's concerning that accepting what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have decreed and not try to go against this. And also for the person to know that hasad mimma yajlib sakatullah, that al-hasad, that it brings about the person being despised by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the person have hasad towards others, know that to bring about upon yourself Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the despise of that person who have hasad towards others. And also the same thing towards the people. The people also will treat you the same thing. The people when they come to know that you have hasad, that they are jealous or of envy towards others, then they also start to avoid you and dislike you. So the people do not like people who show hasad towards others. Because if you do it to that person, so at some point you might do it to me. So people can somewhat try to avoid. So for the person that having hasad, it only bring about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's displeasure towards them. And also it will bring about also the people having dislike towards you. And also with hasad, la yadur illa nafsa, that a person with hasad only hurt yourself. So you start to just fight with yourself. So you might find that people with hasad, that always you have worries and stress, because you're worrying about things that is outside your reach, outside your hand, your control, other people things, what people have and possess. You're worrying about what other people possess, so you start to get stressed. Now, you're trying to outdo others. So you just bring about put unnecessary pressure upon yourself and stress. Just be pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you. And make effort in what they have, alhamdulillah. Then if you believe that you want to be equal to them or of what they have, then do the work. Then put effort in achieving what they may have achieved. Another thing that maybe that they have achieved, regardless of what you may put in as work, you may never achieve what they have achieved. You may never reach that position because that's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's their test. That's their test. And also they mentioned regarding al-hasad, that a person tries to not to have excessive adawa towards others, towards the believers. Not to have, that you understand, excessive adawa, enmity towards the believers. So those are the things, and also try to have love for the believers, and even can someone to overcome it, ilaj. The person matter, give them gift. The person that is coming, say kind things about them, praise them, say mashallah for Allah grant them. So say positive things towards that person, and even give them gifts, so as it doesn't, the hasad, it doesn't grow and overcome you. So do things to out it. That raging fire. Say kind things about the person and what they possess. Make istighfar when anything comes to you that is not proper about that person. So try to manage your feelings towards that person. And in particular, that person is a believer. So not to allow ill feelings to develop and overcome us towards others, believers, due to al-hasad. And the Prophet that I mentioned, and the visitor, and also kind of somewhat to picture the hadith, the Prophet, or to apply the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, when they mentioned, "Unzuru ila man huwa asfal minkum." That the Prophet mentioned, "Unzuru ila man huwa asfal minkum." Look to the one who's less than below you. Look to the one who's below you. وَلَا تَنْظُرُوا إِلَى مَنْ هُوَ فَوْقَكُمْ. And not to look to the one who's above you. So I'll look to the person who maybe their situation is less than yours. And not the one who's above. Not looking above, but look to those that may be below. So they mentioned, وَهُوَ أَجْدَرُ إِلَّا إِلَى أَجْنَسَ. The person look to, not all the time looking to the people who are above, but look to the one whose situation may be worse than yours. The situation of those who maybe the situation is worse than yours. So they mention that of those things that can be used, and also al-istighfar wa dua. Al-istighfar wa dua. So the person also go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wa isti'adha, wa dua, wa istighfar. If things come into our hearts about others, that is not pleasant and may fall into hasad. And as not to be, always be said envious towards others, wanting what other people possess and have. So stay within our limits. If you want more, then make effort, but also whatever people have, be thankful what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless others with, just as you are thankful what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have blessed you with. With that, inshallah ta'ala, we'll end the discussion regarding al-hasad and continue next week regarding the other of those points that I mentioned. وبالله تعالى توفيق وهذا السبيل والآخرة الحمد لله.